suggestion printed for other people. Cassandra Hull was the third kind. The moment she walked into my courtroom, I knew it. Cream blazer, expensive heels, posture polished within an inch of its life, and that look that says, let's get this over with because I have more important places to be. I have seen that look before. It usually belongs to someone who has lived too long inside rooms where money talks first and character never has to speak at all. The case itself was simple on paper, assault on a law enforcement officer. But paper is never the whole story. 3 days before Cassandra stood in front of me, Trooper Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran of the state police, twice decorated for valor, clocked her driving 97 in a 55 zone on State Route 9. He did exactly what any trained officer is supposed to do. He activated his lights. He conducted the stop professionally. He approached the vehicle calmly. What he expected was irritation, maybe argument, maybe tears, maybe excuses. What he got was entitlement at full volume. Before he could even reach the driver's window, Cassandra stepped out of that white Porsche like she was dismounting a stage. Finger in his face, chin up, voice sharp. She told him he had no idea who he was dealing with. She told him her father ran the state. She told him this stop was going to end his career. Trooper Webb did not match her tone. That matters. He stayed calm. He ordered her back into the vehicle. Instead, she shoved him with both hands, hard enough to drive him into the side of his own patrol car. His shoulder took the full impact. He heard it tear before he felt the pain. Then, while a decorated state trooper lay injured on the roadside, Cassandra got back into her car and drove away. Now, if that were all we had, it would still have been serious. But what Cassandra Hull did not know was that a motorist on the overpass above filmed the whole thing, and Trooper Webb's dashboard camera captured every second and every word. Every single word. So by the time she entered my courtroom, the city had already seen what she did, and more importantly, it had heard what she said. My father owns this state. You'll be filing unemployment by Monday. That is not stress talking. That is not panic talking. That is a worldview talking. That is a woman who has confused proximity to power with immunity from consequence. By the morning of trial, my courtroom was packed. Reporters in the press gallery, Trooper Webb's fellow officers in uniform behind the victim's bench. Citizens lined up before dawn because they wanted to know whether the law still meant what it says when the defendant is someone whose last name opens doors. I read rooms for a living. And that room was asking one question only: will the law bend for her too? Then Cassandra walked in, and before she spoke a word, she answered it for herself. She did not glance at Trooper Webb. Not once. He sat there in uniform, arms still in a sling, posture straight, dignity intact, and she passed him like he was a coat rack. No recognition, no discomfort, no shame. That kind of deliberate blindness tells me more than testimony ever could. It tells me the defendant has not yet reached the stage of remorse where another human being becomes visible again. Behind her came Richard Payne, one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the state, and 2 junior associates carrying matching portfolios like stage props. Payne had the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to taking ugly facts and putting a silk tie on them. When I asked for Cassandra's plea, he was on his feet before I finished the sentence, ready with context, provocation, media distortion, and his client's otherwise spotless record. I stopped him. I did not want his voice. I wanted hers. Cassandra looked at me and said, without a blink, that she was not guilty because the whole thing had been blown out of proportion. Blown out of proportion. A 20-year veteran required surgery and spent 3 days in a hospital. And that was her phrase. I set my pen down and asked if she wanted to reconsider that description. She did not. She said Trooper Webb came at her aggressively and that she had barely touched him. That is when I stepped down from the bench. I do not do that often, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. I walked to the monitor, pulled up the dashboard footage myself, and played it without commentary. 43 seconds. Trooper Webb's restraint. Cassandra's threats, the shove, the impact, the collapse. Then I turned back toward her and said what the entire room already understood. A man had protected this state for 2 decades, approached her vehicle with courtesy, and been assaulted for it. And she wanted this court to believe she had barely touched him. Payne tried to recover. He pivoted the way expensive lawyers pivot when they know the facts are ugly, but hope the atmosphere can still be managed. He suggested the stop was irregular. He implied the footage lacked broader context. Then he did what people in his position often do when facts fail them. He reached for the aura of public office. Not directly, not crudely, but delicately. He mentioned the mayor's decades of service. He referenced community standing, civic investment, the burden of public life, the danger of media pressure. Everyone in that room heard the real message under the polished language. Names like Hull are not supposed to be handled like everybody else. So I asked the question I already suspected mattered. Ms. Hull, is your father in this courtroom today? The silence answered first. Then, from the back row, Mayor Gerald Hull stood. No aides, no entourage, no city seal, no press choreography. Just a man in a plain gray suit who looked older than his official photographs and far more tired than a public schedule usually allows. He walked forward and stopped before the bench. Cassandra turned, saw him, and for the first time all morning, the composure cracked. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough to reveal that something real had entered the room. Now, here is the moment that separated this case from every cynical expectation hanging over it. Mayor Hull did not contextualize. He did not hedge. He did not perform outrage at the video while quietly asking for understanding. He said his daughter was wrong, not politically unfortunate, not regrettable, not taken out of context, wrong, clearly, fully, and inexcusable. He turned to Trooper Webb and apologized directly, not as mayor, but as a man ashamed that his family name had been used to threaten an officer doing his job. Then he looked at me and said that his office would not be used to shield Cassandra from the consequences of her actions. Whatever this court decided, she would face it. You could feel the room change. People did not merely hear his words. They recalibrated around them. For one brief moment, the public got to see what integrity looks like when it costs something. And make no mistake, it cost him. Parents are wired to protect their children. That instinct runs deep, and in powerful families, it usually comes wrapped in lawyers, statements, and private calls. Gerald Hull chose principle over instinct in public. That does not happen often. It should happen more. I looked at Cassandra Hull with the full attention the case had earned. I told her I had presided over that courtroom long enough to have seen privilege in all its forms: old money, political connection, inherited title, purchased legal talent, and that without exception, the facts remained the facts. Her facts were not complicated. She assaulted a law enforcement officer on a public highway. She used her father's office as a weapon. She left a decorated veteran on the ground and drove away. I found her guilty. Then I sentenced her. 60 days in county custody, 300 hours of community service with organizations that support law enforcement families, 1 year of counseling, because consequences without understanding do not build anything durable. A formal letter of apology to Trooper Marcus Webb read aloud in court, and a public video statement accepting personal responsibility posted on her own platforms and her family's public channels. I wanted young recruits and ordinary citizens alike to see what unchecked privilege looks like when it mistakes a badge for an obstacle. Then Gerald Hull added one final consequence of his own. He said Cassandra's access to her trust fund would be suspended until every hour of service was completed and verified. She would find her own housing. She would support herself. He said privilege should be earned, not inherited. For the first time since she entered my courtroom, Cassandra looked exactly her age, 28, frightened, exposed, suddenly without insulation. When officers stepped forward to remand her, she no longer listened to Richard Payne's procedural whispers. She was looking only at her father. He crossed the room slowly and met her in that open space between the defense table and the gallery. No cameras close enough to intrude. No aides, no handlers, just a father and a daughter standing in the ruins of a very public moral collapse. He put his hands on her shoulders and told her he loved her, that he would continue loving her through this, but that he loved her too much to stand between her and what she needed to face. He told her it would be hard, that she would get through it, and that when she did, she could become someone he was proud of again. Then she broke, not for effect, not for sympathy, the way people break when they finally stop holding up a false version of themselves. She told him she was sorry. He told her to prove it. The officers waited with dignity. When they stepped apart, Cassandra straightened herself and walked with them without being asked twice. Gerald Hull stood and watched her go. Then Trooper Webb crossed the room, arm in a sling, and extended his good hand. The mayor took it, Webb's fellow officers rose behind him. No one spoke. No one needed to. In all my years on the bench, I had rarely seen a room so thoroughly silenced by the weight of someone doing the right thing. 6 months later, Cassandra Hull walked out of county custody carrying a single duffel bag and no visible trace of the woman who once told a state trooper that her father owned the state. She completed every hour of service. More importantly, she kept showing up after the hours were done. She sat with spouses who lay awake through night shifts. She listened to children describe what it feels like when a parent leaves for work and the family does not know whether that parent is coming home. She did the small invisible work that keeps support organizations running. Somewhere in the middle of that labor, something in her changed. Later, she met Trooper Webb at a community event organized by one of the support groups where she continued volunteering. Their conversation, I am told, was long, private, and necessary. Webb returned to full duty. Cassandra's public apology was viewed by millions. She eventually stood before police recruits and spoke about inherited power, arrogance, and the damage privilege can do when it mistakes itself for immunity. Gerald Hull attended every one of those talks. He sat in the back row in the same plain gray suit, watching his daughter become someone neither of them had fully known she could be. I still think about that case. I think about Gerald Hull standing up from the back row with no armor except his conscience. I think about Marcus Webb extending his hand after all of it. And I think about a young woman who entered my courtroom believing her last name was a substitute for character and walked out of county custody carrying only the person she was finally becoming. That is what keeps me doing this. Not easy cases, not perfect people, but the rare moments when accountability arrives with enough force to break arrogance and enough purpose to build something better in its place. Real love does not rescue someone from consequences. Real love lets them face the truth and demands they become more than the worst thing they did. That day, in my courtroom, a father chose principle over protection. A wounded officer chose grace over bitterness. And the law proved it still means the same thing no matter whose daughter is standing at the defense table. And let me say something else about why this case mattered beyond one traffic stop and one courtroom. Public trust is fragile. People lose faith in institutions quietly, one exception at a time. One phone call, one softened charge, one carefully worded statement. One moment where an ordinary citizen watches a connected defendant walk away untouched and thinks, of course. That is how cynicism grows. So when this case came before me, I knew the audience in that room was bigger than the people sitting there. It included every person in this city who had ever wondered whether the law still had the courage to look power in the eye and say no. That is why Cassandra's first words mattered so much. It's all been blown out of proportion. That was not just a legal posture. It was the language of someone who had never had to measure consequences in real human terms. To her, Trooper Webb was a problem in a uniform. The surgery was unfortunate publicity. The outrage was noise. She had not yet learned the simplest civic truth. When you lay hands on a police officer performing his duty, you are not merely touching one man. You are challenging the structure that protects everyone else. I do not worship authority. That is not my job, but I respect lawful duty. Trooper Webb was not bullying her. He was not humiliating her. He was doing exactly what the public expects police officers to do when someone drives at dangerous speed and then refuses a lawful order. He met hostility with professionalism. That mattered because defense attorneys love confusion. They love a messy record, a heated exchange, a crossword that can be stretched into provocation. Webb did not give them that. His restraint stood there in the video like a witness all by itself, and that is part of why the footage became so powerful. It did not merely show what Cassandra did. It showed what she did against calm, against order, against decency, against a man who had given her every chance to act like an adult before she chose instead to act like a spoiled child with access to power. That is the lesson I carried away from that day. Courts do not exist to flatter titles. They exist to test whether the law is real. If it is only real for the weak, then it is not law at all. It is theater. And I have no interest in theater from the bench. I am interested in facts, consequences, and when possible, transformation rooted in truth rather than public relations. Cassandra Hull came into my courtroom wrapped in certainty, certain that a family name could rearrange the room around her. She left it stripped down to the one thing that actually matters when the doors close and the lawyers go home: character. She had little of it when she arrived. By the time she left custody, she'd begun to build some. That is not a miracle. It is what can happen when justice is delivered. This city needed that lesson. Power should never feel safest when it is least accountable. For everyone watching.
A governor's wife walks into the courtroom expecting special treatment. Confident in her status and influence, she dismisses the proceedings and openly challenges the judge from the moment the hearing begins. As witnesses speak, she interrupts repeatedly, refuses to follow courtroom rules, and insists that her husband's position should exempt her from consequences. The tension rises as the judge calmly warns her to show respect and cooperate with the court. Instead of listening, she doubles down. In a shocking moment, she insults the judge in front of everyone, believing that her political connections will protect her from any real consequences. Gasps echo throughout the courtroom as spectators watch the confrontation unfold. The judge immediately restores order and reminds her that every person who enters the courtroom is subject to the same rules, regardless of wealth, power, or social status. When she continues to defy instructions, the judge takes swift action. Within moments, court officers step forward and escort her into custody for contempt of court. The entire courtroom is left stunned as the governor's wife realizes that influence cannot place anyone above the law. What began as a routine hearing ends with a powerful lesson: respect for the court is not optional, and accountability applies to everyone equally.